has described the work of his collective, the Silk Road Ensemble, as the edge effect. This is where two distinct ecosystems meet, and it is in this space where new life is created. ASCI's Senior Director, Julie Marie Lemon, and I like to think that the students who participate in the collaboration grants experience this edge effect. Where the two students meet, bringing them with them their unique language and perspective, is where new ideas emerge. This evening, we'll hear from 4 teams whose course of study covers a wide spectrum of disciplines: visual arts, neurobiology, anthropology, English and performance studies, computer science, music, composition, physics, and Romance literature. It has been an honor to work with them. Thank you to the students' faculty advisors for their participation in guiding these projects, and thank you to the initiative's funders, the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, the Physical Sciences Division, the Office of the Provost, and UChicago Arts. Before I invite up our first collaboration team, we have a brief welcome from Bill Michael, Associate Provost and Executive Director of UChicago Arts and the Logan Center for the Arts.
My name is Bill Michael. It's my privilege to be the Associate Provost and Executive Director of UChicago Arts and the Reeve and David Logan Center for the Arts. I want to thank you for joining us tonight for the Graduate Collaborative Program for the Art, Science, and Culture Initiative at the University of Chicago. Over the last 10 years, ASCI has had an incredible impact on the arts and the sciences and the intellectual life of the entire university community, particularly in their work with our graduate students, bringing together artists and scientists and social scientists to work together on new and innovative problems and learn from each other and help shape each other's approaches to creating new work, new art, and new knowledge. The Art, Science, and Culture Initiative is such a vibrant part of the arts at the university because it demonstrates the way that our work really does connect and impact the broader intellectual life of the university. I want to take a moment to thank our colleagues at the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering and the Physical Sciences Division for supporting this program, and Julie Marie Lemon and Naomi Bloomberg, who lead this project, and of course our fellows, who every year bring a passion and energy to the work that they do. I hope you enjoy their presentations. Thanks so much for joining us.
Our first team is Dante in the Lab.
Hey everyone, I'm Tanvi. I am a PhD candidate in the physics department. I work in experimental soft matter physics, specifically in the dynamics of packings of grains.
Hello everyone, I'm Beatrice. I am a PhD candidate in Romance languages and literatures. I'm an early modernist working on the cultural, political, and philosophical paradigms regarding the making of Italian tradition. Our project, Dante in the Lab, explores the influences that modern physics and Italian medieval literature share. We decided to focus from the very beginning on Dante's Hell. As you may see, Hell is organized in 9 concentric circles with Satan at the bottom, and the circle represents a progressive decline into disorder, and at the same time a progressive increase in wickedness. The sinners are punished in a way fitting their crimes, and the crimes become more and more serious as we move from the top to the bottom of Hell. The landscape of Dante's Hell reflects also this infernal hierarchy. We go as readers from a very relatively peaceful and calm place in Dante's Limbo to a river of boiling pitch, a desert of burning sand, a wood of very uncanny suicides, until we reach the bottom where we expect to find a peak in disorder, but instead we find Satan and the sinners completely frozen in ice.
The organization of hell, from a physical point of view, is very reminiscent of the concept of entropy. Very broadly construed, entropy is a quantification of disorder or randomness. So the earlier circles of hell, the higher ones that are relatively calm, are said to have relatively low entropy, whereas those towards the bottom have higher entropy. Entropy also prescribes a direction in which processes are allowed to occur in physics. You can only really go from a place of low entropy to higher, and you can't go back. And that's what decides whether a phenomenon is allowed or not. And so when we reach the final circle and we see this apparent decrease in entropy, it's surprising not only from the reader's point of view, but also from a physical point of view. So this sort of disconnect between what we would expect and what we see made us really sort of challenge our notions of what was really happening there. In physics, we tried to consider this from the point of view of an experimental phenomena that's known as entropic phase transitions. So super broadly, and in an entropic phase transition, you start from a system that's very noisy and chaotic and go somewhere crystalline, which appears to have lower entropy, but in fact has great underlying chaos. And this allowed us to reinterpret also the ninth circle of hell from a poetic point of view, where we can now think of it as a place of, again, apparent order and deep underlying chaos.
Our final project consists in a movie. We decided to follow the narrative of a couple going through their personal hell as they end their relationship. The pace and the language of the script reflect this increasing entropy in hell. And we also included illustrations, and we will incorporate the experiment that Tanvi will perform to better convey this dialogic relation between our two fields. Today, we are showing to you our current version of the movie Dante in the Lab.
Have you seen the students' papers?
Check the nightstand.
No, I checked. They're not there. I never lose things. Damn, what the heck? My Dante class finishes at 2, and then I'll be at the library.
Oh, can you remind me to go grab some cake when I'm done at the lab, and can you get the wine?
Why don't I take care of both? What's the occasion?
You do remember we're having dinner with my parents tonight, right?
Damn it. Yes, of course. How could I forget? What are you looking at?
Nothing. I just remembered the dream I had last night.
Was it a nice dream?
No, it was a surreal, random. This winged figure, I guess he was a god. Anyway, this god was carrying me naked and asleep, and then he awakens me and feeds your heart to me.
Sounds like I read aloud too many student midterms.
I was eating your bloody heart and you were terrified.
Surprise, surprise.
Doesn't he believe that morning dreams are prophetic?
He? Dante? What are you talking about?
There are some things that can be found only in books, but sometimes I dream they can be found in reality too. Never mind.
Okay, I'm off. See you soon.
Don't forget the wine.
You know I won't.
Screw you. Can I talk to you for a minute? I have some time before starting class, and I found your note. Is this how we're going to be interacting with each other from now on? Notes?
What do you expect me to do? Start another conversation? After what happened last night? I'm just a man. You called me slothful, inert, that I'm not spontaneous, that I can't make decisions. Well, I made one.
I thought we were getting better at working through things, that we were coming to an arrangement.
No. Wait. Last night was different.
The other night, Michael, you know me. You know I get furious, but then I get over it.
You can't see how many things are hidden behind the veil of words. Last night wasn't just about slamming doors or plates. You've always been quick to get angry, but your rages and temper tantrums are becoming legendary. The chaos is too much for me. Your words had so much gravity.
Gravity. Do you know why my words hurt you, Michael? It's because they're true. As every time you're hurt, you start staring into an abyss, but the abyss merits a hearing, not a dictatorship.
I work with words. Words for me are like particles for you. They might seem insignificant, but collectively they form reality. They form the abyss, Emma. Your words were violent, heavier than the weight of the earth. Because you like to taunt me.
I'm not taunting you. Listen, this is hard for me too. After Max died, you became a different person. I know you can't replace a mentor like Max, but you have to start talking to people again. Okay, you can't keep getting lost in the woods and then expect me to come and save you. You need help, some guide.
Max was my guide. Besides, I have a therapist. We have a therapist.
Okay, no, you haven't been to a session in months, okay? You need to get your life in order.
My life in order? Oh, that's rich. It sounds ridiculous. You've worked on entropy your entire career. And you're telling me I need to keep my life in order? You taught me disorder is vital for change. Well, it's vital for me too. It gives me hope.
Delusional hope.
I tried to resist the chaos for so long. I know it's easier to control your life when everything's frozen in place. Some things need to change. Stagnation is killing us, slowly. Maybe it's better we discuss this in person.
Why here?
I haven't been here in so long. Do you remember when we toured the observatory with Max? It felt like I needed to be here.
But you know I haven't been here since he died.
I think you need this too.
I'm sorry, this is just absurd.
What? To remember that this was where we turned a new page? This was a new start for us.
It was the beginning of our private hell. His death banished us down to the center of the earth.
Wait, do you think it wasn't hard for me to lose Max? To lose the only guide I've ever had in my entire life? When the dust settles and we stop running, I'm as lost as you. The center of the earth is a frozen desert and I feel lost.
I'm not wasting my time with all this. Why did you ask me to come here? To work on us? You've already made your decision, Michael. This isn't one of your books. There's no turning point in the plot, no more pages to be written. The damage is irreversible.
You know what really matters in a story or a poem? The unspoken matters. No, what you write pays justice to what you left unwritten. It's like a broken symmetry. Drives the narrative forward. You should know this as well as I do.
How can you come here as if nothing happened? If Max could hear what you're saying right now. You betrayed him, Michael. You stole his work.
Stole? I spent the best years of my life in this
You
work.
betrayed him before he died, just like you betrayed our marriage.
Can you keep it down, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. What would you like me to say quietly? That you cheated on me?
Keep it down.
That you manipulated me? That you idealized me like I'm one of your characters?
You're as guilty as I am. We're condemned to this hell together. But we do have a choice. Oh, we can either forget everything, listen to me, we can escape this hell and do some penance together. Or we can get stuck. Stuck in this frozen desert, end this marriage.
So this is why you asked me to come here? To coerce me?
No, Emma, stay.
No, you stay. I escape.
Okay. We had a lot of fun making that. Thanks. We had a lot of fun making that, but it was also quite challenging. One of the early challenges in our collaboration was finding a shared lexicon through which we could communicate our work to each other without losing the integrity of these, quite serious concepts. I'll also be taking some lessons from this collaboration back with me to my own research. One of them is this ability to sort of look at a concept very abstract and sort of nebulous, like entropy, and turn it into something that's sort of relatable and tangible. Another is to bring the sense of poetry to my work and approach it from a more artistic point of view.
This collaboration has helped me to find a new and resourceful way to expose a person who works outside of my field to a very complex text like Dante's Comedy in an efficient and effective way that one day probably I will experience with my own students.
We'd just like to thank everyone that was involved in making the film, the cast and the crew, and also the people who helped us throughout the course of the collaboration, our faculty advisors, Julie Marie Lemon, Naomi Blumberg, and the ASCI collaboration grants for giving us the opportunity to work together.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next team is Tony and Jen. It'll just be represented by Tony tonight.
My name's Anton Auth. I'm an artist and a recent graduate of the university's MFA program in visual arts, and my work is primarily concerned with objects and their institutional context. I draw from my time working in the art industry, and my work proposes questions around labor and the social stratification of museum spaces usually. Since graduating, I've been working for an artist and building out my studio space and preparing for a show in Chicago next month. My collaborator's name is Jen Ding. She's a neuroscientist who studies the retina and how visual signals are processed in the eye. Her interests stem from the visual system and how it's evolved over time to process information about complex visual scenes. She received her PhD in 2021 at the university and just moved to Boston to pursue her research in a new field of neurobiology at Harvard. We're both practitioners, which to us means that we are people who make discoveries through one's hands, using materials and methods to understand things with greater detail. We're both interested in visual experience, particularly the idea that vision is subjective. The implicit idea behind a phrase like seeing is believing is that our eyes capture the truth of reality, but we both believe that seeing is a radically subjective experience, like I said, and the idea of truth to be equally as wishy-washy in many cases. So through conversations, we started to explore and interpret how people see the disciplines of art and science, and how scientists and artists see themselves and each other. We also wanted to understand how the handcraft of science experiments differ from that of artists and make sense of the conventions that science and art are presented under. We didn't aim to make any quantitative judgments, rather explore our own interpretations through a series of mini projects that loosely deal with the role of subjectivity in seeing art and science. Something I learned from Jen was that each person perceives colors differently, and some people are colorblind in different ways. Like this picture above, I had no idea anything about color, what it meant to be colorblind. But it means that they may be lacking specific types of cells in the eye that will allow them to see a full range of color, causing the person to experience reds as green and orange or vice versa. Our primary goal, like I said, was to make time for dialogue between two practitioners who felt that they were examining the same subject matter, visual experience, but from radically different viewpoints. I personally also wanted to meet folks who operated outside the art world, and I was finding it really hard to do so on campus. So the grant was a great chance to branch out of my own discipline. In the next few slides, Jen will describe, she's recorded some videos for us. She'll describe two experiments we conducted, one that explored color naming and identification, and the other one, less data-driven, that explored how we as individuals, respective of our fields, look at things. And then after that, I'll talk about two mini projects and just give some thoughts about what I kind of gleaned from our time together.
One of the first mini projects we embarked on was looking at how people perceive color. The colors that we see can be divided up into different categories. The warm colors span from red to yellow, and then the cool colors span from green to purple. There was an MIT study that identified that there are more terms for warm colors than for cool colors in many languages. They hypothesized that warm color objects are more useful for survival, such as fruits and vegetables. Cool colors are more prevalent in the background, such as trees, shadows, and bodies of water, and they do not catch our attention upon first glance. We wanted to explore how people perceive warm colors versus cool colors. We also wanted to find out if differences in perception correlate with people's background, such as where they grew up or the languages that they speak. This is very interesting to us to study how people's subjective perception of color can be impacted by their experience. The first question we wanted to ask was whether people could more consistently identify warm color words compared to cool color words. We created a survey and gave the quiz to our family and friends, as well as to anonymous survey takers on Mechanical Turk. In the end, we had over 80 participants. In the survey, we first asked a series of demographic questions, such as where they were from, which languages they spoke, and what was their occupation. Then we had a list of 60 color words. 30 words were for warm colors, such as dandelion and cherry and orange, and 30 words were for cool colors, such as mint, turquoise, and purple. We asked them to choose which color in the color grid best represented each of the color terms. So for example, for the word amber, they had to pick the letter that best corresponded to the shade that they think represents the word amber.
We had a hypothesis that the participants' answers for warm colors could be more consistent than the participants' answers for cool color words. For example, let's say that we asked people to pick the color term cherry. If everyone has the same internal mental image of the term cherry, their answers could converge around the same shades of red. This is what is shown in the top color panel. However, if people don't have a consistent idea of what cherry represents, they choose shades that are very different from each other. This is shown in the bottom panel.
Each color has an RGB value, which is a series of 3 numbers. RGB stands for red, green, and blue values, and each value spans from 0 to 225. The RGB color model represents how different values of green, red, and blue are added together to produce the shades of color that we see. We can actually see how consistent the people's answers are for each color term by plotting each person's answer in RGB space. Each axis of these 3D graphs represents one RGB value. Here, we ask participants to choose shades they think represent warm colors like dandelion or yellow, as well as cool colors such as basil and green. Each dot represents one participant's answer. If everybody has the same mental image of the color term, we expect the dots to be very close in space, which is what we see for the warm colors such as dandelion and yellow. However, when we take a look at the cool color terms, we see that the dots occupy a larger area of space. That means that people's mental image of these cool color terms do not converge on the same shades of color. Their answer for cool color terms are therefore more inconsistent and variable. Our project explores that people, on the whole, have similar ideas for shades associated with warm colors compared to cool colors. In a similar vein of the first mini project, we wanted to see how Tony and I would subjectively experience different words. For this project, we generated a list of 20 different adjectives, and then we challenged ourselves to make art or images that represented each of these 20 words. We were interested in finding out what feelings each of these terms would evoke in us and how they would affect the images that we created. Here, I will show an example of 3 different words and the images each of us created for those words. The 3 words are enchanted, slow, and wacky. I made some collages to help me represent the word enchanted and wacky, and I took a photo at the aquarium for the word slow. For 2 of my 3 words, I gravitated towards a more dreamy and perhaps surrealist interpretation of these adjectives. I was really interested in the images Tony provided for these words and found that he went about the exercise in a completely different way. For his first term, enchanted, he provides an image of cheese because he feels intoxicated when he eats aged cheddar. And his second image is of a family cemetery in Michigan. His third image is of a bathtub which costs $15,000, and this is very wacky in its ostentation. It seemed to me that Tony was focusing on how the objects in real life made him feel, whereas I tried to make images that would evoke a feeling in the viewer.
This was kind of like one of the first things that I did. She sent me this document, and it was like despite containing a lot of words that I felt like were used in art, it was really hard for me to work through the document. So I cut it up into pieces, and once I did that, it was like really easy to see and understand this document that otherwise was really hard for me to access as someone who doesn't understand science. And then on the right, we just started making these worksheets for each other and sending them back and forth. This is one I sent Jen. It has a bunch of weird hardware that I've seen and found and worked with. And it was just interesting to see. I was just wondering if she would pull from her language of science or not, or kind of wasn't sure how it would end up. But she didn't really actually pull from her science language, which I thought was kind of interesting. In addition to these kind of exercises we would post each other at our studios and at the lab, which was really cool to see Jen work in the lab. And we were just totally tripping out to this idea of craftspersonship in the lab, because I never really thought about that. And we also talked about in the lab and in science, it seems like when you're a scientist, you work really hard to remove yourself from your experiments and remove evidence of your hand from your experiments, because it compromises the experiment in the end, and it kind of messes with your credibility. Whereas we were having this conversation over Jen literally dissecting a mouse retina, and she was talking about how this was really hard at first, but she had done it over 300 times, and I just watched her effortlessly do something really impressive. And so it just got my brain thinking about craft and where is its place in the lab versus where is its place in the studio. I was particularly drawn to the tools in which the tiny mouse retina were handled with. There was a paintbrush with every bristle plucked out of it except for one, so you could like push it around in the water, in the saline solution that she was looking at it in. And there were tiny scissors. There was a special water filtration system that made water called ultra pure water. And there was also a tiny TV that Jen would expose the retinal cells to movement in a way. So there would be like a bar that would move across the screen, left to right, right to left, top to bottom. And she was recording the cell's electroconvulsive activity. I think that's right. Another thing that I thought was really cool, this is just like a side, but one on the left is a microscope and on the right is a mill, and they're both like used for us in our experiments. I mean, they both work on 3 axes, and I just thought that was really neat. Another thing that was really valuable for my own art practice was the grant gave me the opportunity to buy a GoPro 360-degree camera, which was really, so it was like definitely an impulse buy at first. But shortly afterwards, I noticed that something about the camera that made it really relevant to our experiments about removing oneself from the thing that you're producing. This camera is designed with 2 180-degree lenses that the camera records from and stitches together an image using complex software that's like in the camera. Since you're shooting 360 degrees, it captures everything. It always shoots what I'm shooting. It always shoots my body and my face, and it captures my reaction to things in real time. It doesn't discern between subject and the artist, and it records 5K video of everything in its proximity. And so I was like, at the beginning of the grant period, was making videos that were kind of dealing with my own subjectivity and going on bike rides through the neighborhood and looking at things and commenting on them, kind of like some kind of YouTuber persona that I was channeling. And I just think that this 360 camera is like a really nice tool for me because what I said, it like captures everything. So this conversation about placing oneself as the subject in an artwork happened while I was also doing a lot of swimming in the lake. And one day, and while doing just that, I was reminded of this tiny retina specimen as I was floating in the lake. And I was just thinking about, again, like, where's the subject? Who am I as like the artist? As an artist, I'm constantly running tests on myself. I'm trying new things, putting myself in really uncomfortable situations to learn and to know more than I did before. We had like initially put in our proposal to make a book, and I think we needed more time than we had allotted for ourselves, but we planned to produce something on paper, whether it's a poster or a book, that kind of like deals with all the things that we're talking about. Thank you guys, thanks everyone. Thanks to Julia Marie and Naomi and our advisors, Jeff and Dr. Stephanie Palmer, and the grant for providing us the opportunity to collaborate.
Our next team is Robot Mediation of Performer-Spectator Dynamics. That's Baldwin and Val.
I am Baldwin Jang. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in music composition.
And I'm Valerie Zhao. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in computer science. You can think of our project as having 2 parts. One having being the core, which is a composition and performance including a social robot and an interactive audience. And there is the second part, which is the outer layer of a research study examining the role of the robot in these performances.
So first, I'll begin by talking about the composition at the core of this project. The composition is entitled MusicBot 1975. In designing this piece, I wanted to reflect on a humanistic question that runs parallel to our scientific research questions, but is distinct from it. The humanistic question I was considering is, thinking in a broader history of musical automata, musicians and inventors have long developed robots to make music, questioning what is special about human expressivity if robots are also capable of performing music. This project investigates the possibility of an audience automata and asks, if robots can serve as an MC or mediator in interactive performance environments, what does that imply about being a human listener and audience member? How might this piece and study complicate the idea of an audience altogether? So I'll just give a brief overview of the composition and the technological features of it. So the composition is in 3 movements with interactive audience. The first movement is for oboe and electronics and is performed by Zach Pulse. The second movement is for cellists playing objects as well as a laid down cello, electric bass, and electronics, and that's performed by Leah Cole and Zach Moore. And the third movement features all 3 of the performers named above and electronics. To go over some technological points, In the first movement, we use a sentiment analysis algorithm to analyze audience feedback from the Twitch chat window to generate a cue for the performer to do in response. Audience feedback is sorted into 4 main emotions with corresponding cues and gestures for each emotion. Those emotions that we chose were happy, sad, confused, and angry. In the second movement, the robot chooses randomly from audience responses and then selects one of 2 possible cues to give to performers in each captcha question. So the robot asks the performers to identify certain prompts based on a selection of captcha. And each captcha question can only be answered either correctly or incorrectly. So if the audience answers correctly, that pushes the music in one way, and if the audience answers incorrectly, that pushes the music in a different way. In the third movement, the robot asks the audience to vote on different options, whether to have the performers play faster or higher, drunker or off-key. Based on the audience vote tally, the robot then gives a cue to the performers and adjusts the electronics accordingly. I'm going to show you now an excerpt of the video score. This is what the performers see as they're performing. This is from movement 1. So the robot has asked the audience, how is Zach doing? Zach being the oboist. And if the audience responds with a positive emotional sentiment by saying the word fantastic or happy or so great, then it pulls up a selection of music for the oboist to play that is marked as happy. And if instead, in response to the question, how is Zach doing, they say, you suck, or you're terrible, or some other negative emotion, that pulls up a different emotionally coded set of music. So without further ado, I'm going to play you excerpts of all 3 movements. So this is a 40-minute piece and very hard to distill into 6 minutes, but I tried my best. And I wanted to give you a taste of each of the 3 movements. So as you're watching, pay attention to the right side of the screen right here. This is the Twitch window. This is where the audience will be. This is where the robot will be asking questions and also where the audience will be replying. This is a pretty fast-paced work when you consider both of these layers, being the first layer being the performance and the second being the Twitch chat window. So I would encourage you to go back and forth between the Twitch chat window and the performance screen. Okay, here we go.
Patron Van McCoy 503 says nice. Thank you, Van McCoy 503. Patron Frankie Avalon 01 says, thank you. That's not correct. That's not correct. Vote for your favorite improviser of the top 2.
Now I will pass it off to Valerie to talk about the research study portion of this project.
Yeah, so for our research study, our motivation, if you could go on to the next slide, is that we know that in typical concerts, when everyone is in the same physical space, the performers and the audience could really feel each other's energy, right? The performers can see behavior cues from the audience in order to see like how the audience feels about the performance and vice versa. However, online, when concerts are being live streamed, even though it's happening in real time, the audience and the performers are not necessarily in the same physical space. And when that happens, the energy or the experience is a bit more muted. And in this case, the performers might not necessarily be able to see the audience. So previous scientific literature has shown that robots can actually affect the dynamics between people, can affect the way that people behave around each other and interact with each other. So we were interested in seeing whether having a robot mediator between the performers and the audience live streamed concerts, during live streamed concerts, could also affect the dynamics between those two parties. Yeah, so we ended up having 3 performances. In 2 of the performances, they were similar to the clip that you saw, was the robot sitting at the table in the same room as the performers, which was being broadcasted on Twitch, and the audience were participants recruited from elsewhere and therefore not in the room. We had another performance where instead of having the robot sitting in the space of the performers and speaking and gesturing, everything was done on the chat window, and there was no physical robot there. So we surveyed the audience members, and we also analyzed that data. So here's just a preview of what the results show. In this graph, we can see that we asked participants to how much they would associate a certain word with the MusicBot 1975 for each of the 3 performances. And we found that it seemed like people from the chatbot performance, which was the one without the robot, as well as the first robot performance, actually thought that MusicBot 1975 was more closely associated with words that indicate competence. And on the right of this slide are some of the quotes that appeared from each of those 3 audiences. Also, we found that in response to the prompt, the musicians responded to my input and feedback. Audience members in the first robot performance thought that was true, whereas people in the other 2 performances did not find the prompt resonating with them as much. So in other words, people in the first robot performance thought that the musicians really responded to their feedback. And this was only true in movement 1 and not in the other 2 movements. So there are 3 quotes on the slides that also correspond to what people have been telling us in the surveys.
So some key takeaways for us. One for me was that working with improvisation and technology can lead to really interesting compositional decisions. I've worked with both improvisation and this level of technology in different pieces in different contexts, but this was the first where I merged the 2 together, and I think the results were really pushing my compositional language. The other big takeaway for me was that theatrical components and theatrical scenarios can evolve organically from the technology, such as with the OnlyFans Cam Show and the CAPTCHA second movement.
And because we had to have the robot, gesture and say things, we gained a lot of experience in programming the Now Robot, which is what the robot is called. And we also gained experience in designing studies and executing studies in artistic settings, which are not usually the case in at least my field of research. So in terms of the challenges, because Baldwin and I came to this collaboration from a mutual interest of working with robots in artistic settings, we actually, and because we had different backgrounds, we had to carefully balance between the artistic vision and scientific rigor to make sure that despite having to rigorously design a study that is foolproof, that we still allow the artistic vision, allow the freedom for artistic vision. And there were also quite a few technical challenges in working with the robot, in working with the sound systems, and so on that we had to tackle.
And in closing, we would like to thank the Art, Science, Culture Initiative Graduate Collaboration Grants for their generous funding, the amazing musicians Leah Cole, Zach Moore, and Zach Pulse, without whom this project could not have happened.
We also have to thank everyone who helped us on the research study side, so Professor Sarah Siebel, Sam Pluta, Mark Downey, and Blaise as well as Brian Baird and Kylie Davis from the Center for Decision Research at UChicago, who helped us recruit participants and run the study. And of course, our pilot and study participants for helping us gather data. So, and of course, Julie Marie and Naomi for supporting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The last collaboration is The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills with Marissa Fenley and Blair Bainbridge, but they'll be represented by Marissa this evening.
All right, hello. I am Marissa Fenley. I'm a PhD in English and Theater and Performance Studies, and my dissertation is on puppetry in the 20th, 21st centuries, focusing on the ways that puppets perform personhood. And my collaborator, Blair Bainbridge, is a PhD in Anthropology and Conceptual and Historical Studies of Science, and they work on the sort of cultural milieu in which astronomy and study of space is produced, and with a special interest in how the sort of conventions of the study of space come to bear on speculative fiction. And so this project was funded both by the Art, Science, and Culture Initiative, as well as the Committee on Theater and Performance Studies, the Creativity Grant, and also our own personal fundraiser, Kickstarter campaign. And before I start, I just wanted to give credit for all of our collaborators. We had quite the team, and you can sort of see here too how many of us ended up wearing many hats throughout this production. And I just want to sort of flag that my role was co-creator, producer, and puppet designer, so I made the puppets. And then Blair's role was associate producer, developing dramaturg, and editor, which they are currently in the process of doing. So Beverly Hill, which is a pilot comedy episode, explores the dynamics of rich housewifery by forcing it to adjust to a post-capitalist world. So this is sort of part satire on the Real Housewives franchise, especially the Beverly Hills franchise, as well as sort of a larger exploration of a sort of speculative post-capitalist utopia or dystopia, depending on if you ask us or the Housewives. This half-an-hour pilot episode gestures towards a longer series and takes place after a global economic revolution and follows 6 formerly rich bitches, each represented by a 15-inch rod puppet, as they struggle to maintain their sense of self in a world that has left them behind. So the basic sort of plot overview of our pilot is that these 6 housewives now live together in a dilapidated mansion on Beverly Hill, which is the last hill left standing in the one-time playground of the rich and famous Beverly Hills. For the housewives, Beverly Hill is a safe haven from the revolutionaries who brought about the end of capitalism and their own personal apocalypse. To the rest of the world, though, Beverly Hill is a trash heap, and its mysterious mansion dwellers are merely delusional shut-ins in the vein of Grey Gardens who refuse to acclimate to a new world order without wealth gaps. So as we follow our 6 squatterettes throughout the episode, we learn how they have managed to reconstruct modes of capital accumulation amongst themselves, a patriarchal hierarchy to which they subject themselves and each other in order to preserve the symbolic order of wifeliness, and fictional genealogies of whiteness past, those storied lineages that whisper hereditary promises of restoring the housewives to their conditional roles of power. The show explores numerous inconsistencies built into the women's identities, now exposed by the absence of an externally maintained system of wealth. So Blair, as somebody who sort of very much studies the constructs and systemic features that underpin different types of imaginaries for creating speculative worlds, very much brought a lot to our ability to sort of actually create a sort of artificial economy, which happens to be made exclusively with bean cans. And that was sort of paired with a lot of my work, both doing puppetry as a puppeteer myself, but also sort of thinking a lot about how the puppets as objects can perform different constructs of personhood that are then informed by these sort of extra systemic features that Blair helped us develop. So I'm going to sort of go through just the process of building this. So we began about a year ago in September. And this is sort of what the process of making the puppets looks like. It started off with a lot of egg cartons that were then turned into papier-mâché clay by tearing them up and soaking them in salt water and then eventually mixing them with Elmer's glue. I then sort of created an armature for the puppet out of twine and cardboard, slowly made different types of limbs, almost like beads that sort of wrapped around the twine, and then baked in the oven. You can see sort of the evolution of sculpting the papier-mâché clay into a face and body, then painting that body, and finally costuming it. This is then ultimately what they all look like. You'll see Kathy at the top left there, Minnie. They all sort of have different stock character personalities that we used to build them on. So Kathy is the nut. And these are all drawn from the Real Housewives franchise in terms of what we sort of see across those franchises. Kathy is the nut, Minnie is the villain, although that actually kind of changed as we wrote the script. She's more the sort of awkward, humorless, very, very unadaptable person who takes herself too seriously, isn't confident enough to be a villain. Savannah, who's the star, the Duchess, she was once married to a duke, but she lost her title and thus has claimed her lineage through being very Dutch. And she is the actual villain of the show, but was initially the social climber. Harley, who is the slut, and Fabienne, who is the career woman. So then we began design. So our amazing set designer, Kate Fitt, who actually lives in the Bay Area, a lot of our collaborators are all across the country, in LA, the Bay Area, New York, and Chicago, ended up designing our 4 locations. So we have the bathroom, we have the kitchen, the garden, and the dining room that ended up becoming these sort of tiny dollhouse-like set pieces that could be removed as we did our filming. And these were the initial designs, which we sort of were developing throughout February and through June. It was quite a process where we were all, on Zoom collaborating on what these aesthetics should look like. Then we sort of moved into doing hybrid workshops and rehearsals, which was one of the main challenges of this piece. Having our entire collaborative team be across the country and of course not able to safely convene in person at more than 5 people at a time in a room, it made it quite challenging. So we started with workshops which were led by Perry Daniel, who is a puppeteer and professor at UCLA. And so she led us through several hybrid workshops. You can see those are the first 2 on the left. And we actually had some of us sign in on Zoom, but you can also see, especially in that bottom left picture, that a few of us were able to convene in the Logan Center just a few floors down. Then we moved into sort of rehearsals where we were actually going through the choreography that Perry helped us develop and practicing together with mock sets that our assistant set designer Nora Smith built us, and we're able to actually kind of really develop a team and cast dynamic together, even though we were not all in the same room at the same time. So then we moved into fundraising because this project was pretty massive. So we ended up having a $20,000 budget in order to make this piece. And we're sort of still in the process. We are just finished filming and are now into post. So this is the sort of archive of our campaign, and I will show you briefly this promo video that was directed and edited by Blair. The puppetry was by myself and our puppeteer, Daphne, and the song is an original song by our sound designer, Hedra Rowan. That's a sneak peek of what is to come. I'm not going to be able to show actual footage from our shoot because it is very far from being presentable, and it is also top secret. Which brings me to The next and most recent part of this project, which was actually filming, which also took place in the Logan Center on the 5th floor. And so these are a few process shots. There were a few different ways that we sort of used the features of the Logan Center to build out this world. You can see in the middle that is actually our dining room set that sort of, again, resembles a dollhouse with a wall removed, and any of those walls can be sort of taken out at any time. But we also use the green screen, which is going to be how we sort of film what are called their confessionals. If anyone's familiar with the franchise, they often are sort of weirdly not in their homes, but in front of a green screen of their homes for most of those. So we're going to use bad green screen technology for most of this, which fits our technical abilities very well. Here you can also see that we had giant monitors, which was how the puppeteers were able to see what they were doing while we were sort of directing them. And I will be able to show you a few clips.
Shoulder, can you put Kathy's shoulder over the Dutch's face?
Yes.
And then reveal, which means pull away. There we go. Ah! All right. Let's go back. And resume. Sees what's happening there. Down, up, to the leg. That's our cue to bring the leg around.
Woo! How's that?
And hold. Let's go back. Let's put Kathy into a straddle.
So that is a sneak peek into our process. You can hear our director, Christina Roussos, talking in the background there while our puppeteers, Kevin Oiso and Ben Stacy, are both speaking the lines and doing the puppetry at the same time. We will ultimately do all of our voices ADR, so our puppeteers won't actually be voicing them, but they definitely brought them to life in the room. And here is one last clip. This is of a confessional. This is Harley and the puppeteer Ana Diaz Barrica.
You ready for me, darling?
You ready for me, darling? Hi, I'm Harley, Savannah's baby sis. I am a child star and teen country singer / sex symbol. Booked my first gig when I was 6 months old. It was an ad for infant bikinis. The producer said they'd never seen a baby with such a womanly shape.
I didn't realize that all of the clips I picked were so sexually charged, but that might be true of every single scene in this show. So that gives you a sense of what it was like in the room where we were sort of watching everything happen on these monitors. We would sort of do a lot of very, very detailed work and different angles, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to talk really briefly about some of the dramaturgical work, and a lot of this is credit to Blair. Well, this one's credit to me because it's not puppets. The next one will be credit to Blair. So why use puppets to tell this story when we could easily have used actors? In fact, probably easier than using puppets. But sort of one of the main things that I wanted to explore was the fact that these are puppets that do not have a lot of articulation in their faces. So if you think of like a ventriloquist dummy that can move its eyes and move its mouth and has a lot more expressiveness in its face, these are very static. And so since we're doing a piece that is sort of looking at all of the ways in which these women refuse to adapt, refuse to respond, not only to the world around them, but to each other, we wanted to really highlight the ways that the puppets are also, in fact, very static and actually look not only at their expressiveness, but also at their lack of expressiveness. Of course, there's the Botox parallel as well, but this was sort of a deeper conceptual level of just how little they are able to be animate in relationship to the world around them. The other thing that we were looking at, as you probably noticed in some of those process clips, is that the hands of the puppeteers are all hyper-present in the show. And in fact, the puppeteers have their own role. They are crew members who are sort of part of this post-revolutionary world that have come to Beverly Hill to film these women and then have their own responses to them and the somewhat horrific things that they say. And so they're used as sort of a way to mark the commentary throughout the piece. But this is also something that we very much borrowed from the franchise. So disembodied hands appear throughout the series, and almost always as either producers, glam squads who are sort of doing their makeup, or various type of servant figures who just only enter as hands. So you can kind of see in that second image, that's actually a hand that's in a red glove emerging from a wall of roses serving tequila shots. You can see a producer hand lighting a cigarette for Taylor Armstrong in the top photo, and then Dorit getting her full glam done by several different hands who completely enter the frame, but their bodies and faces are otherwise completely cut out. So we wanted to kind of explore this dynamic of hands being the only way in which the production crew that has quite a bit of influence over how these women are ultimately edited. They drive a lot of the narratives, so they're both sort of servants, but they also have quite a bit of agency and control over how they appear, how the women appear. And so we're sort of exploring this sort of push and pull of who has more power at any given moment. The housewives who have hands serving them, or the hands who are ultimately in charge of their animation and how they are appearing before us. And that is it. Thank you so much to Naomi and Julie Marie and all of the many collaborators who helped us make this happen.
Well, thank you all for your really fantastic presentations. Thank you.